Good morning everyone, and welcome to Bankstown Library. I'm going to be talking to you today about some botanical reads that I've enjoyed recently and some of the appeal characteristics that come from reading different books. So many of you are at home and you may have already been accessing our e-resources online through BorrowBox and RB Digital. Or you may have some of these books still from when the library closed that you've got at home. So we're going to do a series of different book chats about different appeal characteristics of certain genres and how they cross over into other books. So as you can see, I've got some lovely native flowers here, and these are featured on quite a few book covers that I've seen recently. So botanical reads are really becoming quite popular, and it doesn't have to do with just Australian native plants. It can do with other botanical, like, books with garden as a title, or flowers or other things. So we're going to talk about a couple of books that I've read recently and what I've enjoyed about those and the appeal characteristics that we call them. And I'll explain to you what the two terms are. Appeal characteristics are basically what you enjoy about the book. What is it that appeals to you? And there's many different levels of discussion about the pace of the book, the tone of the book, the characters and all those things. So if someone asks you what you like about the book, sometimes we tell them about the plot and not really about what I liked about the book. So botanical for me is an appeal characteristic. And in the two books that I'm talking about, they're actually featured in an element of the book, which is also really nice, because I have seen some books with botanical on the cover and the story really doesn't relate to anything whatsoever. So, you just have a look at the book on the blurb on the back and just see what the book is about. The crossover is actually to do with what the book is about, and some books, like one of them I'm featuring, is linked to a historical event, and that's something that you can read up on at a later time. And the crossover really is sometimes the author is inspired by a historical event and actually then writes a fictional book about it, and it could be one of those fictional characters of history, and then they've created a different sideline to their identity. So we're going to talk about those in these examples, and you'll understand what those terms mean. Okay, so we're going to go to the first example, and I've got it, unfortunately the book's out on loan, so I have an image that's downloaded from our e-library. So the titles I'm talking about today are actually on our e-library. I have checked. So if it does end up being borrowed, you can reserve them. And if you are reading them and you've actually finished with them, rather than wait for the end of the loan period, just return them straight away, and then it can go to the next person without them having to wait too long. Okay, so the first example I'm talking about is Josephines Garden by Stephanie Parkin, who's actually a New Zealander by birth. I think she lives in Australia. And this has been inspired by the history of Napoleon's wife, Josephine. And it's set at the end of the 18th century and the early 19th century France at the time of the French Revolution and beyond. And Josephine, who was in a former life a prisoner, Rose de, and I won't say the last because it's French and my French is terrible, but she escapes the guillotine when the French Revolution occurs, and after 10 years she works her way out of her escape into being a socialite and comes to the attention of Napoleon Bonaparte and creates her own empire through her garden. So you can see in the cover there's obviously some clues to that. There's some wattle and a waratah. So France and the connection to Australia, what could that be? So the native plants feature as part of this story because it's also the time of enlightenment in Europe, and where patronage sent groups of scientists to the Pacific, and they would return with seeds trying to replicate conditions, for those seeds to germinate and the timing, and that was a very difficult task because what grows in Australia does not necessarily grow in France. So Josephine obviously found these scientists who brought back these seeds and sponsored them and was able to grow certain plants which she put into her garden. And that was called a Garden of Wonders by the author. So this was part of a status in the time with privileged people in their gardens. So the appeal characteristics to me, obviously, as I mentioned, was the botanical theme. There's lots of good plot lines and interesting characters, the background of the French Revolution. Napoleon, who's obviously a prominent historical figure himself, is actually a secondary character in this book. And it's really Josephine's story of her in the garden, and it's based on historical fact. So Stephanie has a compelling writing style, that's the author, and she has strong, complex characters. So Josephine is certainly one of those as the main character, and her tumultuous relationship with Napoleon, which goes right through the story. So this would appeal to history lovers, Australian history, and the relationship with France during the period of scientific enlightenment, and especially as France missed out on colonising Australia. It would appeal to plant and natural history lovers and anyone that enjoys a well-written and interesting read. So it may encourage you to read more about Josephines Garden. And crossing over into non-fiction books, so I'm just going to bring up the other book, which I actually read afterwards, was called Napoleon, the Empress and the Artist. So what I did was I really wanted to go looking for more information, and I went into the non-fiction area of the library and I found a book that told me further about the story. So that's where crossovers can go from fiction into non-fiction and vice versa. Okay, so basically the crossovers are history, historical figures, natural history and events of history, and the landscape, between Australia described by the scientists and then being back in France, and then obviously them collaborating with each other, and then obviously with their patrons, which Josephine was a patron. Science and botany, and plant species and science of note. So that's the first book that I've featured, and the other one is going to be, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. So I'll just bring that picture up. It's a little bit harder to see, but again you can see by the cover that there's lots of really beautiful native flowers on the cover, and covers can be very appealing to readers. I must say, working in a library, I remember covers more than I do the titles, so that's just how different we all are. So this story, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, is by Holly Ringland, and she won 2 awards for this particular book. So it is an award winner. So it's about 9-year-old Alice Hart, and she's forced to leave. She's been orphaned, and she goes to live with her grandmother, who runs a native plant farm. So she is widowed on her own, and she has a whole lot of women workers that work on that farm, and they become a surrogate family to Alice. And so basically it's a story of love and loss and betrayal. So you follow Alice's journey as she learns the most powerful story is her own story, and the differing experience of Alice as the central character. So it very much deals with the physical landscapes of the different places that Alice has lived, and the people and the experiences of her life. It's a lot more of a simple story than the other ones, far more complex, where it's taken a lot of the historical elements into it, whereas this is more a saga of the family and finding your roots. So basically the book would appeal to lovers of good family saga featuring strong women characters like grandmother, mother and daughter relationships, looking at perseverance and strength and love. moving away and coming back to your roots is a central theme of this book, and the farm represents the growth of plants, but it also very much is a side, sort of theme to the growth of people in life. It's an engaging read and an emotional and moving story, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Australian author, and I'm hoping that she's going to write again because she's written lots of good things. So basically, in the BorrowBox and BorrowBox app in audio and ebook that you can download, there's a nice feature at the bottom where you can actually tell a friend about what you've read if you really liked it. So I've discovered that one recently, and that's a really good feature to have. So you could email your friend or your mother, I really like this book, and recommend that to them and put a little blurb in it as well. So there are other titles available. All those ones that I've mentioned are available on BorrowBox and RB Digital, so you can access those from our e-resources page, cbcity/e-resources, and you'll be asked to put your library card number in, and if you have RB Digital, download both as an app from the App Store and set up an account for RB Digital. If you have any problems, call our libraries. We're here to help you, so you can call 9789 9423. Okay, so that's the end of my chat for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk again soon. Bye from the library.